Mino Pajashik, welcome. Welcome to InDigital Insights. Monique Manatch and Dishnakos, Kitikanik and Ishnabek and Dojaba. My name is Monique Manatch, and I'm a member of the Algonquins of Barrier Lake. And today we are very honored and so happy to have Gabriel Uqaituk with us. Gabriel is an Inuk uh, artist. He was born and raised in Montreal and works in the digital realm. He takes uh, transforms photographs and transforms them into abstract images using symbols of your Inuit roots. And I'd like to start off just by asking you, how do you do that? How is that? That sounds really cool and colorful.
Yes, indeed. Well, the the very core, I guess, of my digital work, especially, is photography. What I do with all of my pieces, I start off with a photograph, basically, and then I take that photograph, whatever it may be. It could be like a pattern of a wall, bricks on a wall, or a flower or something, and then I transform that totally, almost entirely, into something uh, more abstract and more colorful, with a few applications like Photoshop, and then a few apps too on Android on my cell phone. Um, yeah, and then the exciting part for me is when I bring all that work onto the computer. Uh, uh, with my own little archive of all my works, and I try to blend multiple images together, and then often also take archival photos or historical photos that are found online of Inuit culture, and yeah, and blend it on top of those.
How did you? How did that evolve?
So yeah, for me, it started basically when I growing up in the city of Montreal. My mother always pushed me to be creative. She helped me out with drawing lessons, and in high school I went to an art high school, and so that combined with my love for computers that I learned in the late 90s. When I got to college later on in life, I decided to try a graphic design program, which was called at that time publication design and hypermedia technology, and I really fell in love with Photoshop at that time. And thankfully, that also right after college, I landed a job in what's it called again? Sorry, at the Avatuk Cultural Institute, which is an Inuit cultural institute, as a photo technician. And there, they further taught me Photoshop, and so I started experimenting with all the different aspects of Photoshop. It's quite a vast program. So I spent it a lot, many years. I've always enjoyed it. More and more as time went on, indigeneity, Inuit culture become more and more popular, right? More and more engaged in society and stuff. And that really got me inspired to keep trying to push towards not just making abstract digital works, but trying to reconnect to my roots as an Inuk, as an urban Inuk. So yeah, uh, basically, it's a for me it's always kind of an attempt to try to rebuild myself, my Inuk identity specifically, and to reconnect to that and to share it to the world also. Like what does it mean in very simple manners, right? In 2D imagery mostly. Yeah.
How do you find? Because when you're working with images that are archival materials, these are shared moments with friends and family, and you're able to take them and turn them into something more uh, that that really conveys and expresses the Inuit culture. And how do you um, I don't know if it's your process I'm wondering about, or maybe reaction from the community, or how do you balance it in your artwork, considering that some of these are personal stories and you're making them a public.
I've had many reactions in the Inuit world, especially from "you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't have this person" to "wow, that's amazing, I'm totally in love," and everything in between. Um, One of my ways of balancing this is going as far back in the past as possible when it comes to photography and archival, imagery and stuff like that. Um, One of my works from 2015. I think I could share it right now. This original portrait is from, I think, around 1913, uh, taken by, which in Nunavik is a famous explorer now. I'm forgetting his name, but he has a very strong legacy today, still today in Nunavik. So yeah, this is one example. So it's an old photo, over 100 years now, and so it's a mystery to who she is specifically. This was taken. The original photo was taken from the Avatar Cultural Institute, and so yeah, so that's one of the ways. Okay, it's over 100 years old. We don't know too much of her story, but it'd be nice to kind of like share. Like her portrait alone is very nice. And another example I have here is very simple. This is my uh, my take on the ulu, which is the woman's traditional knife in Inuit culture. As you might know, um, this was my mother's ulu, and I just took a photo of it and added layers of other abstract images I created. So that it's just very simple, very common. Everybody loves the ulu, and it's a very ancient symbol too. It's extremely old and it's widespread throughout all of Inuit Nunangat, right? Inuit lands, Inuit culture, from Greenland to Siberia, and Labrador and Quebec and Nunavut. So um, yeah, that's a couple of the ways that I do that. And yeah, when it comes to it is kind of a fine line. You got to find a way to not be too personal, not too personal, and also very general. I like to be very general.
Where is your mom from?
My mother is from Nunavik, specifically a village called Puvolnituk, on the northern side of the Hudson's Bay coast. It's, I think, a village around 2,000 people. It's, I think, about the second largest village of Nunavik, which has 14 communities.
It must be quite a story how she came to be in Montreal.
Yes, yes, very dramatic in some ways. She had to fight for that right to be able to come down south to study. Right, her grandparents were very. My great grandparents were very religious and very traditional at the same time, and my mother was the eldest of her family, so she had to take care of the family, right? And so yeah, and this is how I came to be. uh, I was conceived in the north and then born in here in the city, and basically stayed here my whole life.
It must have been through her that you learned about your Inuit traditions and symbols, and must have heavily influenced your work.
Oh yes, 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 for sure. My mother, of course, being the strongest Inuit link I've always had in the city. Um, she always made sure that we participated in a lot of Inuit cultural activities in the city. There would always often be Inuit feasts, Inuit gatherings. At Christmas time, we would go spend time up north in the winter, and she at some point was studying anthropology, and she always had a vast collection of books about Inuit research, all sorts of Inuit subjects, and she would also always have the ulu, a nice collection of ulu knives, and she would sew in some traditional ways a little bit, and all these things. So yeah, and she speaks very well Inuktitut, and I always go to her for questions about learning Inuktitut today.
What does she think about your work?
I'm not too sure. She's always been very supportive of my work. Yeah, yeah, she appreciates it, and she shares it, and she supports me as much as she can. Yeah.
One of the things that fascinates me is how digital can facilitate that process of knowledge transference. So how we are taught. Is it for us? It's a tool that we're able to use now to be able to maintain the cultural knowledge and to pass it on to the next generation. Do you find that? Do you see it that way, or have you found that particular use for digital?
Yes, that is a very good question. I really love that question because it has everything to do with my experience too as a digital artist. It's a very broad question with many aspects to it. I'm very happy to have access to the digital realm, to have easy access. And yes, it is a tool for us. I totally believe this. It is a tool for us as indigenous peoples, especially, to be able to learn and to be self-supportive, and it connects communities, it connects artists to the rest of society very quickly, and allows us to learn on our own too. That's one thing that I've done also, is I've always been able to learn on my own, and thanks to websites like YouTube, and people who share links to tutorials or whatever it is on social media, right? Instagram and Facebook. And I look too at the Avatar Cultural Institute here in Montreal, here in Quebec, and they use servers to preserve texts and to publicize books, and save photos, and all this stuff. So yeah, the digital realm is very important.
In some communities, they have in mind too a little bit, but more I find in as you go west, there are protocols around how knowledge is transferred, who receives that knowledge. There's a friend of mine who is an artist, and she belongs to Raven Clan. She's Haida. And when her family realized that she was interested in the arts and creating work, they took her aside and they said, "Okay, you are Raven Clan, and these are our images. These are how we portray the Raven. You don't use the killer whale. You don't use other clans. You use Raven, and now you are responsible." So there was this protocol of how she was to use, or how she was to design her clan images. I don't have that in my community. We do have some protocols around stories, or mostly stories, not so much images, but mostly stories that I'm aware of. And that is that a story can be shared with me, and I can tell a story, but I can't, like when, if I share a story in school, I've had teachers come to me and say, "Oh, we'd love to take this story and make puppets." And I have to say, I'm sorry. There was a whole protocol around whether and how you can use this story. So that there would need to be an elder involved. It couldn't just be a one-off. Yeah, today we're going to make puppets. You can't just take our creation stories. They're sacred. So I'm wondering if there's anything similar to that, any kind of protocol around the use of symbols, or around the knowledge that you're working with. Have you come across any of these in your work?
I wouldn't say that I have come across protocols, so to say. I would see it more of a general understanding, and more of an importance that, as much as possible, you should have, of course, a respect towards the story, towards the source of the story, especially. Um, but in my experience, considering the fact that I use more general symbols, I believe um, it's not as important to follow protocols. Um, but I think the main difference in Inuit culture is that, yeah, we do have like a strong sense of keeping our traditions and stories alive, right? But we also don't mind sharing at all whatsoever in any situation. Today we have books, research books, children's books, you know, uh, magazines, websites, and all these things, and we're all sharing as much as possible. And it's very important because we don't want to lose them, right? But I do understand, I think, the idea of having protocols, perhaps having elders there to ensure that these stories are and images are kept alive and respected and shared as they were taught, right? Because I don't believe we can actually know how old these stories are, right? Passed down over many, many, many generations.
Well, I'm as we move forward and we start building these digital communities, we're at ICMI. We're wondering and we're looking at, well, um, how can our digital community, how can we ensure that it's based on Indigenous values? We held a conference in 2019, and there were two things that came out of that conference. And the one was some things should never go on the internet. And the second was we want to create a showcase for Indigenous artists. But the caveat we were given was that you show a trailer or you show a thumbnail. And if people are interested in the work of that artist, then they contact that artist and they build a relationship, and then they and the artist can decide how that relationship will move forward. Will they, sell the work? Will they be able to use it? Will they be able to share it? That kind of thing. Because we want to make sure, of course, cultural appropriation is rampant, and we want to make sure that the work is treated in a way that is respectful and also meets with the values of each community, because it's different for each community. It's different. How would you see that in your own work and in, I guess, interacting? I'm always hesitant. People say, well, what would your community do? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. There's so many possibilities, right? When it comes to things like appropriation and finding ways that our communities could maintain their cultures and their roots, and keep them alive and strong. In the digital realm, it's very difficult today, of course, because it firstly, on one level, it's so easy to access, right? So easy to copy and paste and print, and if you have a good, it's easy to establish networks, and but there's also a second aspect to this that I'd like to talk about here is the we live in an era of electronic or digital colonialism, right? um, if right now, like as we speak, we most of us probably all have social media accounts, uh, but on top of that too, most of the internet as we know it has been privatized. you know Amazon Web Services and all these other big what we would call so-called American corporations today that have these enormous data centers, right? So, and there's a lot implicated in this. A lot of resources are extracted from the world to be able to maintain these data centers. And so, for me, it's when I think about the indigenous community and how they could benefit from sharing. I believe that we should be able, each indigenous community, whatever you feel you're from, should be able to maintain firstly our digital rights. It's important be able to maintain and express and have our digital rights valued by the rest of society. And also I've been also very curious about how we could find ways to kind of uh, because I guess one of the general ideas that we all have as Indigenous peoples is that we've always been the caretakers, not only of our communities, but also our environment, you know, our lands, our waters, whatever it may be. So, how do we integrate this kind of like this digital aspect, which requires a lot of resources, right? Materials and resources and time, and it has to run a lot. So I've been curious. That's a great question. I've been curious. Like, I believe there is a way to have our own kind of data centers in a way, you know, our own connections where we could maintain our rights as indigenous communities, and we could also maintain a more eco-friendly approach to this on smaller scales, of course.
There's a lot of conversation around digital sovereignty and what that means to different communities. I know one community, Dokis First Nation, had a wonderful project where they were videotaping their elders, where they were gathering their history and whatever documentation and everything. And it was through their library. What happened though is that they didn't upload it to the internet. They have it on servers in the library, and community members have to come in and engage and build relationship, and then they would have access to this information, as opposed to just putting it up online and then people find it. And because in some communities, um, for example, west, you see the teepees, and some of them have paintings on their teepees. And some joker comes along and takes a picture of it and sticks it on a T-shirt and starts selling it. And these images are only certain families are allowed to use these images or take care of these images. It's usually a stewardship or a caretaker type situation. They are responsible for putting them on the teepee, on their family's teepee, and taking care of it. And there's all these teachings that go along with it, and that's the concern. I mean, we in my community we use birch bark a lot. So there's images, and it's just so cool the way they do it. Like on a basket, there'll be moose and beaver and different images, and but what they have to do is they have to scrape away everything else and leave the image on the birch bark. So it's not like they're drawing an image; they're scraping away everything else. And to have those images uploaded and then just taken and used, like how do we protect that? And also because our rights are collective. A few years ago, there was a standing committee to look at the Copyright Act, because the Copyright Act is based on individuals. But an individual in a community doesn't own the right. It's the collective who caretake that right. And so how do we transfer that? How do we pivot that onto an online setting?
Yeah, that's that is a very good question. Also, I think um, first I'd like to know. I haven't asked you. I forgot to ask you. Which community are you from?
I'm from the Algonquins of Barrier Lake, also known as Rapid Lake. Rapid Lake was actually made when Barrier Lake was where our community would gather in the summertime, but they flooded that. And as they flooded, I think it was a river, Rapid River, it became Rapid Lake. And then they moved everybody onto this sand peninsula of 59 acres. They're up in La Vérendrye Park, which was a park set aside for the use of the Algonquins, but then it got devolved to the province, and now Quebec is basically clear cutting it. So I've got this little tiny reserve, uh, not remote but isolated,
Mm.
but 3.5 hours north of Ottawa.
Okay, okay.
So for them, they have fiber, but it only goes to the band office and the school, basically, and the nurses' station or the health center. But everybody else has to have satellite, which, in these small communities, there's no employment. Their school only goes to grade 6. My father had decided that we would be raised in Toronto. And that's because otherwise I would have gone to residential school. And so would my brothers. Rapid Lake was only created in 1961. So while there's still, thankfully, a real connection to the land and to the language. Um, it's very much under siege from the extraction companies and from the government. They've caused huge divisions within the community. And people who have been traumatized at the Amos residential school, you bring that home with you, right? So all that trauma is now like multi-generational. So it's a real challenge to maintain the culture, to maintain the language. And while digital tools are a boon, it's the only way I can say, I wish I had video of my grandmother, telling stories. Because it's more, you write it down, it takes all the emotion, you dehydrate it. But if you have those, images or that video of them speaking and the way they tilt their head, that certain look in their eye, like it's it tells you more, in 30 seconds than you'll ever see out of a photograph or ever see out of some report written by an anthropologist.
That goes back to how do we ensure that this is kept sacred, I guess, in a way, right? The situation is very similar in Nunavik, right? There's a lot of communities in the James Bay region that have been displaced by Hydro Quebec, and all these systems that are put into place that cause a lot of trauma amongst the people. But you know, I think a lot myself. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity. There's a lot like on the National Film Board websites, and a lot from like we in Nunavut we have Uvagut TV and all these other radio and broadcast corporations that are in the Arctic right now, and they're sharing elders stories, youth stories, which is great, and so we are already in the process of kind of you know establishing I guess I would say a network of a digital network. But going back to what I was saying earlier, we still, it's not democratic, it's not as democratic as it should be. And that's, I think, the key. What I believe, in my opinion, I believe the key is the I don't know how else to say this, but the democratization of our rights in the digital world. I want to go back to this relates to what we were saying earlier about having people that are there to ensure that how did you say it, this, to ensure that the images and the culture is alive, kept alive in certain ways.
Yeah, we need stewards.
Stewards, there you go. Yeah, when I think of stewards in the Inuit culture, it certainly is our elders. You know, I think, and I think this rings true with many cultures. But it's very expressed a little differently in Inuit cultures. Um, Whenever I encounter elders, they're often the most empathetic, but also the most rugged, and they have the most experience, and they're still today very much connected to how things were done all the way up until the arrival of the radio and the Hudson's Bay Company and all these things, right? So, but it can't be done with the elders alone. We have to have also, I believe, that we have to educate a lot of the younger generations today, a lot of the youth, and to teach them not only about how to build a data center, what is a data center, what is digital colonialism, what are these things that allow us to save and to share and connect to the internet and the rest of society. But also, how could we as people, as indigenous peoples, change the way things are being done, to learn about it, to change it, to discuss it democratically, to vote on it, perhaps, like just try to really, I guess what I'm trying to say, try to blend in our tradition, all of our traditional values into the digital values, I guess, with the digital realm today, and make it our own, so that it's not just about us today and the next generations. It's really about every other generation coming that could benefit from this. How could we also make sure that the next generations benefit from these systems.
Well, I mean, we need like using digital technology in a way that impacts language. I worked on a report a few years ago now and spoke to many community radio stations across, Indigenous community radio stations across Canada. And every single one of them said the same thing, that the radio station helped maintain the language.
Hmm.
That they saw it, and I agree that it's an essential service.
Hmm.
Because maybe if somebody's out on the land and they haven't reported in, or there's all these, or there's weather coming, or being able to reach people when they're out on the land, be able to have elders tell stories, so they're not just talking to their own family, they're talking to the whole community. The other thing is that I'm sure this is true of Inuktitut, but in Algonquin language, is very locative. We have a reserve. We're about 3.5 hours northeast of here. There's a reserve about an hour and a half. It's Kittigon-Zibi, and then we're Kittiganik. Kittiganik means rapid lake, and so Kittigon-Zibi. Originally, those people came from the Montreal area, and when they brought the Haudenosaunee up after the Revolutionary War and created all the reserves at Ganawagi, Ganazadagi, Akwesasne, all the way along. They wanted the Algonquins to share the reserve, and we're like, well, we're a different nation. So those Algonquins moved up to where they are now, but their dialect is different because their land was different, and our languages are so locative. And I always wonder, so if we have a word in our language that comes from a certain location in the territory, what happens to that word when that location is clear cut?
What happens? How does it I love that question so much, and it's very it really uh boosts my imaginations quite a lot. There's a lot of possibilities there. The way I see this, I can see a lot of similarities in Nunavik, right? Each 14 community, in a way, has their own kind of local way of speaking Inuktitut, right? And one community on one end compared to the other, they might not always understand each other, but they do understand each other overall. There's this idea. So how do we localize the internet? How do we make sure that what is being shared also retains um, its locality, I guess, in a way to say it. One way I believe could be possible is through metadata. Um, all that is shared right now today has metadata. um, one of the aspects of digital colonialism is where you are. Where are you right now as you're talking, or as you're scrolling on your phone, or as you're banking, or as you're shopping online? Where do you go to restaurants? All these things, are is kind of like within the digital colonial realm, and so already that can be used in maybe in future indigenous digital realms, right? This, but used differently, not for the sake of profit, of course, and advertising, but for the sake of the preservation of the community where this language or this image or this person is from. Make sure that when it is shared, that there's information alongside with it that can be accessed, that says this is the location, this is what it was like. We talk about being displaced. How did our relatives, keep their language from where they're from originally? When they moved, did they change it? Did they adapt? I always ask myself those questions. Because in Nunavik, that's how Nunavik was created. It was the displacement and the creation of the Hydro-Quebec project in the James Bay region. And so, like, a lot of Cree people, a lot of Inuit too, were displaced and traveled and all this today. And yeah, and how do we not only do that? Maintain? How do we maintain our own metadata, but also how do we protect it from outside forces who might want to like today to reap benefits from that?
Exactly. It's like the art that gets made for pennies on the canvas and then gets sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do we? It's that sovereignty. One of the ways I learned that Asuma worked was it was like an intranet where it was based in the community, and the computers who had it created the network. So you could opt into that network, but it was a local network, that they were able to share, and in that sense, they were able to protect, the information. It's I think it's if it can be in conjunction with or alongside, because in order to, I think there needs to be that access as well to the World Wide Web, but there does need to be a door, not a door, but a gateway,
Yeah.
something,
A
so that
gateway for sure.
when people come and they want to have that information, there is again a guardian
Hmm.
to say, well, why do you need it? I know in Labrador, in the Inuk communities, there's you have to fill out, if you want to do research, you have to fill out an application to the government to say, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it, this is why I'm coming to your territory, which I think is fair.
Hmm.
It's totally fair because, then there's accountability, and whether it's done, if the research is done digitally or in person, I think that accountability needs to be there.
That is specifically why I believe it's important that we have our own data centers in a way. Be it like you said with Isuma locally, like that. That's how the internet was in the late '90s and early 2000s. That's how I learned about the internet growing up. Is that it was mostly locally, computer to computer. That's a great way. That's a very democratic way too. To preserve and to share our culture. But well, what if we wanted to share Inuit values with, let's say, Algonquin values, right? Or let's say Aotearoa, New Zealand. What about the people there in New Zealand? Australia, all these indigenous peoples across the world in the end too should be doing the same thing as we're trying to do today, and try to find ways to democratically and indigenously create a digital realm, so that I've always been a big dreamer, and my big dream is that in 50 years, 40 years, that we're able to maintain our own, as indigenous peoples, as Inuit peoples, our own digital to maintain our own digital realm, so to say, and to be able to share it with the world too. The internet is a vast tool that is global too at the same time, right? I think it'd be amazing. Let's say some indigenous peoples in some other country on another continent, they're having trouble with the government. Okay, well, we have some experience with that with our own government. Well, let's have over the internet, let's have some discussion about this, see how we could help each other perhaps. Or we have stories, plays, dramas that have been shared for eons now, right? So we want to keep sharing those. We want the world to know about them. Oh, maybe we share it with with another peoples, and they have similar stories, or it really, really, there is a lot of possibilities, right? If we have uh, our own uh, physical network, run by indigenous peoples mostly, in the majority for indigenous peoples.
That was something that I've heard a lot, that people have said in the community, that we need our own Indigenous institutions, that maybe not institutions, but our own Indigenous governed councils where we can deal with these things. I always find it so fascinating when I was working with some people from South America a few years ago, a number of years ago, and so many of our stories were the same. So many of our teachings were the same,
Mm.
and then when they talk about the Navajo, and they have stories of people leaving and going north, and then you go up into Northwest, like you go into northern British Columbia, the Dene people, and the language is the same. So I mean, how could it be that they have the same language, and the Navajo have a story of them leaving? I have an elder, he's hilarious, I love him. He talks about, when they talk about the Bering Strait theory, about how we all came over the ice bridge to the Bering Strait. He's like, how do you know we weren't going the other way?
Yeah.
First time you said it, it totally took me aback. I'm like, oh, maybe we were.
Oh.
He said, and so if we came across the Bering Strait, did we race all the way down to where the Mayan people are and immediately start building pyramids?
I do really like that theory, though. Like I've heard recently that there was a archaeological site that was uncovered on the west coast in BC. That is a village that was 15,000 years old, and this goes 2,000 years beyond the Bering Strait theory, which I think still today says that 13,000 years ago, we started traveling from the Bering Strait down, and so and in Brazil there's prehistoric rock art that's 13,000 years old. So
And there, yeah, and even I think like there's other places where it's like 40 or 50 even. Some have in North America. They have, so I don't know. I don't think it's, but I do think though that the circumpolar, um, the like the Inuit and the Sami and the other, I think these people, there was a connection, a familial connection with, because there's so many. I was really fortunate to work with the Sami in Norway,
all
and
right.
um, oh, they were amazing. They had a TV station. They have a parliament. They
What?
have this parliament, yeah.
Okay,
And so
okay.
the stories they tell are so similar to other stories that I've heard, and some of their creation stories are so similar. I think there was, like, as vast as the land is. Um, I think just even maybe because the environment was so similar, but I think there was there was a, because they still together to this day, the Sami in Greenland and in Norway and in Russia and here, like there's still a sense of connection
Hmm.
between these communities.
Very, very, very strong. This the history with colonialism is slightly different. There's always been this interconnectedness, right? And it goes from the local with the Sami and Inuit cultures in the circumpolar realm to the international today. Even more so. Uh, my mother, Lisa Habakwaluk, she's part of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and all these circumpolar peoples meet and gather and discuss a lot of different things related to our culture and to our lands, today. So it's very beautiful, and I'd like to learn more about the Sami culture. It's really cool that you had the chance. So I'd like to compare to, like, I always like to compare Inuit stories with other culture stories, any other culture stories. We do have our own roots in the Arctic, as Inuit through Siberia and Greenland and many many migrations. And maybe in Nunavik we've been around for 4,000 years in Nunavik alone, and the evidence shows that we came from Siberia, and moved all across the Arctic many times. There's beautiful stories there too.
Exactly, that connection. Like there's so many connections when you think about here in Ottawa. I was talking to an archaeologist one time, and they said, um, that there were, vases that were found that came from Florida. And because we use the rivers as highways, one way or another, this vase had been transferred all the way up until it finally ended up here in Ottawa. The seeds inside the vase came from South America. And this is minimum 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. The vase itself was, carbon dated.
Yeah.
And corn was originally created by the Mayans. It was created by human hand. It was like engines. What do they call that now? GMO. Like it was engineered by Mayans. Corn cannot grow without human beings. And here, in where we are here, it's sort of the northernmost area where corn can actually grow. And when you think about how far that territory is to where the Mayans are, to where we are, and how corn got to be up this far. It's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
those connections, those trade routes, that network. I always look at it as, some of the work I've been doing. We talk about the Indigenous use of digital technology, and we talk about how storytelling, everything is an oral transmission of knowledge. And so when we lose our elders, entire libraries are gone. And how do we And that's why digital is so, I think, important. I've heard people say if you're videotaping an elder, though, you're removing that relationship between them and the youth. But I don't know. We bring in youth to train them, and that's the content we use to train that. We sit down with your elder, videotape your elder. I don't know if that's something that you've seen.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. In Inuit culture too, we're taught at a very young age. Even to my mother taught me, always look up, always respect your elders, always listen to them, always attend to them. It is true that the key that we shouldn't forget. I'm glad you brought this up. Is that it's important to have experience too with that knowledge. Our elders, the elders, are the ones that had all the experience and knowledge, and their elders had that had their own experience and knowledge, but could teach very important lessons that to keep and maintain the generational, uh, what I like to call the generational glue going, right? The all the important values of what it means to be a person, what it means to be a community, what it means to be a family. It would be very easy to forget. That's one of the things I believe, to me, anyways, would be kind of difficult to share. I like what you brought up. That you shouldn't, the idea that you shouldn't film an elder while you're there with them. You should really experience it together too, because it's about memory too. But if we are to thrive in a digital world, because the world is becoming more and more digital, I believe there still are ways that we can share that kind of idea, of having an elder. It's important to record the elders today. I believe more so now than ever. And then through the recordings of an elder, someone could watch and learn and listen from them, and then it's also not just about the digital, right? The digital is a tool, so it's about remembering also. I think one of the main drives for this, for me, I believe, is how fast things are changing in Nunavik, especially in the Arctic. Climate change is very real. The ice is melting very, very fast, and there's more and more interest with globalization. With the Northwest Passage of ships coming through more and more. Globalization is happening very fast. So the world is changing very fast. More and more. The Inuit in Nunavik are fighting a lot of colonialism today, intergenerational trauma. The internet is becoming more and more available with Starlink and with fiber internet coming in, so we finally have access to faster internet. So we're and the issue is that this internet is very Americanized. I like to say it's very neo-colonial in a way. So it's very easy to forget. There's not many words in Inuktitut that could express a lot of things that we learn on the internet.
That's when they said they started losing the language in Rapid Lake, was when the internet came in.
Oh, there you go.
The little ones, yeah, because it was all
Yeah.
in English. So now they have immersion, I think, until grade 3 or 4. But you're right, yeah, and it's Americanized. It's not even like Canadian.
Hmm. Yeah, the majority, right?
When you're saying about that, about learning from the elders, and I think you've really hit on something that either when we create these projects, there needs to be more time spent having someone work with that elder, listen to that elder, build relationship with that elder before we come in to film.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm doing it in my own community, that I go in and for a week at least, I mean, that's nothing, right,
Mm-hmm.
compared to the time that was spent with the elders, years, lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you have them, and maybe it's a relative, or maybe it's usually family. Have them be with their elders and create a space for them to be with those elders and to listen and to learn from those elders. And then you come in and film.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're passing that knowledge on to the next generation, and you're able to safeguard it, uh, that knowledge. I think, yeah, you've really hit on something there, because the way we frame it now, we just go in 5 days. Here's the budget. You come, you sit. We talk for 10 minutes, and then I start videotaping. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
rude.
Yeah.
There needs to be more of a relationship built. That's the thing. Like, how do you see that happening with our universities, with our other institutions? How can we build these relationships? It's more than just coming in and doing an opening and closing ceremony.
From my experience, uh, uh, um, it throughout the years, it always has come down to the media and grants in a way. Because I remember a time when, and this was all over Inuit and Indigenous kind of society, that the fact that researchers from universities were always kind of like careless, and in a way, I guess I could say careless is very, very broad, but they would just come in and short periods of time into our communities, do some research, go back to the universities, and gain a lot of knowledge, and maybe even some material wealth from this, and very much enclosed in their own. But today, and it's taken some years, but now more there's more curiosity, and there's more understanding of the vastness of indigenous and Inuit uh, uh, values and culture, right? So there's more of a leniency to try to respect that. um, but and then in the Inuit world, what I've noticed happening, and I think this is going to continue to evolve, hopefully, is more and more now there's Inuit. They're hiring more and more Inuit to either do the research, on the land in the communities, right? They really want to, here in Nunavik especially, they really want to make sure, and in Labrador too, especially, that our government organizations have come forward and have said, this is enough. This is enough. We want to do things differently. We have a voice. We have our own democracies. We have our own organizations. And that has really helped in Quebec, especially for like the university realm, the research realm, to finally kind of like say, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. You've been here a very long time on these lands that we want to be involved in, and how could we help in a way. And in the art realm, I'm very, very grateful that there's the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Homayuk. They have a whole museum dedicated to Inuit art, right? I'm not sure if it was the National Gallery too, or I know there was a museum in Ottawa that hired an Inuk curator. And when I did a year at Concordia University here in Montreal, I had an Inuk teacher teach teach about uh, Inuit drawing. So I think more and more, and this is related to my identity as an urban Inuk, more and more I think we'll see uh, Inuit, um, I guess we could call them role models, right? Uh, Established within these, here in Canada, so-called Canada, these Canadian systems, right, of universities and museums and all this stuff. There was a time. I'm happy today. When I look back, there was a time when museums, anything related to Inuit, was about how old and ancient we were. It was about the old clothing. It was about the old kayak, the kayak, all the old igloos and the old tools we used to use. And you'd walk in the museum and you'd see maybe like a representation of an Inuk with the traditional clothing, but it always ignored the today, the now, right? Today we are a blend of that, of the traditional and the new, right? We very difficultly still have to kind of continue merging these two notions, right? So I think by integrating more and more indigenous peoples within these systems, and also in the future, I believe it's important to have entire. I think this is very idealistic, but to have entire like indigenous universities and an entire indigenous whatever establishment, led by indigenous peoples, from, not only from local areas but from all over the world.
Absolutely. And I know they're way ahead of us. The Maori are way ahead of us with that. And I know that they have this conference every couple of years. It's been a while since I've heard of them though, but they're an Indigenous education and Indigenous worldwide Indigenous um, like academic where they talk about the knowledge and what happens to the knowledge. I know we're finally starting to make inroads in some areas with the knowledge and the I always some wonderful people told me they call them belongings as opposed to artifacts at the Vatican. And for a long time, the Vatican refused to admit they had anything. But through the work of Dr. Gloria Bell, they finally said, okay. Yeah, well, they were gifts, they said, because they did finally come here with some wampum belts
All right.
at the McCord, actually, in Montreal.
Mm.
See, for me, the whole mnemonic device, we have a pike constitution where we take bones of a pike and we arrange them in a certain way, and it becomes, this is the image of fire, and that's your spirit. This is the head, and that's your temple. That's your temple. This, and it goes and it has these different ones. This is a butterfly, and that's your freedom. There's all these different ones, and so for me, these mnemonic devices, and I spoke with an artist, Michelle Sillyboy, and she was talking about, she said, they're not pictographs,
Mm.
they're hieroglyphics. This is our language,
Mm.
which is why, I love seeing how, like what you do when you um, combine the ancestral with the contemporary, like that to me is it's beautiful.
It is. It is absolutely beautiful. Yeah. That's one of the things that I'm coming to terms with my art today is this traditional idea, right? The story you just shared with the wampum belts. For me, it's always been about how we Inuit have always been very good at using tools and transforming things, right? That we have direct access to, like ivory and bones and stone and snow and water and ice. It's about survival, and not just about survival but about sharing, right? Ensuring that our knowledge is shared to others, that we exist, that these trades are, all this vast knowledge, right? So I see my art kind of similar to that in a way. It's about transforming something into perhaps a tool or art. But it's similar to that in a way. And what you just shared with me too, it kind of really reflects that idea too, that we as human beings are very good at this, um, using things from the real world and sharing it and having that valued from generation to generation. That's one of the lessons I believe we should keep taking, right? Moving forward in the digital realm. How could we transform these pixels, that we see on the screen, so that the, it becomes something of value to a culture, to a people, to a community with very strong indigenous, values and roots.
I think it's how different cultures or nations express that knowledge. And I'm wondering, because I want to get some more images of your work.
Yeah,
Where can we find your work?
you could find me right now on social media. Nuriki is my great 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 grandfather's name, and Nura means hair. And what people tell me, they always kind of laugh, like, oh, it means a short hair, someone with short hair. So yeah, if you follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, it's with an I, and here I have kind of photos of my latest works from last winter and spring. I share, sometimes I do some vending at markets, so I share all that information there. Some of the products I do, and some photos. Here's an example of some of the latest work that I have. We Inuit, like many other cultures, right? But in our own way, we've always appreciated nature, and we've always appreciated animals. There's a lot of old mythology and old stories in the Inuit culture about people transforming into animals, animals transforming into people. So I've been wanting to show an appreciation to that. So I did a whole series on birds. Uh, there's the caribou here, and it's blended with my photography work. Yeah, and very colorful, saturated. I love that saturated look.
It's gorgeous. Are you going to be at any events or anything like that in Montreal this summer?
I think the next one that I know of will be in the coming months, maybe closer to the fall. So yeah, now and then, but you know, I'll be posting it on social media. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Kachimi Gwich, thank you so much for taking this time today. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. I learned a lot.
And so
And
have I. Thank you, Monique.
thank you, Kachimi Gwich.
Nakulmik